Welcome back to Trust Your Oats. In our last episode, we talked about the system, the supply chain, the traceability, and how we track a single oat from a field in Wyoming all the way to your breakfast bowl. But today, we need to talk about the final hurdle, the ultimate test. Imagine you are standing in a massive warehouse. In front of you is a batch of oats, thousands of pounds of grain, ready to be packaged and shipped. The label is going to say, gluten-free. How do you know with absolute scientific certainty that it actually is? You test it, right? But how do you test it? Do you test a handful from the top, a scoop from the bottom? And what exactly is the test looking for? For the celiac community, these are not academic questions. These are questions of health and safety. Because when it comes to gluten contamination in oats, the math can be incredibly deceptive. Averages can lie, and a test is only as good as the sample it measures. Today, we are diving deep into the science of gluten testing. We are going to explore the R5 ELISA method, the dangerous reality of the hotspot problem, and why the purity protocol is the only way to truly trust the batch. This is Trust the Batch. To understand how we test for gluten, we have to go back to the 1990s, to the University of the Basque Country in Spain. There, a researcher named Veronica Mendez and her colleagues developed something revolutionary, the R5 monoclonal antibody. Antibodies are proteins that your immune system uses to identify and neutralize foreign objects. Mendez and her team created an antibody that specifically recognizes a unique sequence of 5 amino acids: glutamine, glutamine, proline, phenylalanine, proline, or QQPFP for short. Why is that specific sequence so important? Because it is found in wheat gliadin, rye secalin, and barley hordein, the exact proteins that trigger a reaction in people with celiac disease. This discovery led to the creation of the R5 Mendez Sandwich ELISA test. ELISA stands for Enzyme-Linked Immunosorbent Assay. Here's how it works. You take a plate and coat it with the R5 antibody. You add a liquid extract of the food you want to test. If there is gluten present, the R5 antibody grabs onto it. Then you add a second R5 antibody that has an enzyme attached to it. This creates a sandwich: antibody, gluten, antibody. Finally, you add a substance that changes color when it reacts with the enzyme. The darker the color, the more gluten is in the sample. This method was so accurate and reliable that in the early 2000s, the Codex Alimentarius, the international food standards body established by the World Health Organization, adopted the R5 ELISA as the Type 1 reference method for gluten analysis. It is incredibly sensitive. The limit of detection for the R5 ELISA is typically around 1.5 to 3 parts per million. But here's the catch. The ELISA test is a brilliant piece of science. It will tell you exactly how much gluten is in the tiny sample you put into the test tube. But it cannot tell you anything about the thousands of pounds of oats you left behind in the warehouse. In August 2013, the FDA published its final rule on gluten-free labeling. They established that any food labeled gluten-free must contain less than 20 parts per million of gluten. 20 parts per million. It sounds like a tiny amount, and it is. Clinical studies like the landmark 2007 trial by Dr. Carlo Cattasi suggest that most people with celiac disease can tolerate up to 10 milligrams of gluten per day without intestinal damage. At 20 parts per million, you would have to eat over a pound of food to hit that 10 milligram limit. So the 20 parts per million standard makes sense. But the FDA rule has a significant loophole. It does not mandate a specific testing frequency or a specific sampling plan. Compliance is entirely up to the manufacturer. And this is where we run into the hotspot problem. Gluten contamination in oats is not like sugar dissolved in coffee. It is not uniformly distributed. Contamination usually happens because stray kernels of wheat, barley, or rye get mixed in with the oats during harvesting, transport, or processing. Let's do some math. A single kernel of wheat weighs about 40 milligrams. About 12% of that kernel is protein, and about 80% of that protein is gluten. So, one single wheat kernel contains roughly 3.8 milligrams of gluten. If that one single wheat kernel ends up in a standard 40-gram serving of your morning oatmeal, that serving now contains 95 parts per million of gluten. That is nearly 5 times the FDA limit, from one kernel. Now imagine a manufacturer uses a testing method called composite sampling. They take a little scoop of oats from 30 different bags in a massive batch. They grind them all up together, mix them thoroughly, and run one ELISA test on the mixture. If 29 of those bags are perfectly pure, and one bag has a few wheat kernels in it, the mixing process dilutes the contamination. The test result comes back at, say, 5 parts per million. The batch passes. The manufacturer labels it gluten-free. But the contamination is still there. It is just hiding in a hotspot. And if you are the unlucky consumer who buys the bag with the hotspot, you are not getting 5 parts per million. You are getting a massive spike of gluten. Averages can lie. And when you rely on mechanical sorting to clean up contaminated oats, you are playing a dangerous game of statistical roulette. For years, the conventional oat industry has relied on mechanical sorting to produce gluten-free oats. They take commodity oats, oats that were grown in fields right next to wheat, harvested with the same combines and transported in the same trucks, and they run them through massive optical sorting machines. These machines use cameras and air jets to spot the wheat and barley kernels and blast them out of the oat stream. It is impressive technology. But it is not perfect. Some wheat and barley kernels are the exact same size, shape, and color as an oat groat. The machines miss them. A 2011 study published in the journal Food Additives and Contaminants looked at the Canadian commercial oat supply. They found that 88% of the oat samples they tested were contaminated with gluten above 20 parts per million. When you start with a highly contaminated product and try to clean it up, you are always going to have hotspots. And if your testing protocol relies on composite sampling and batch averages, those hotspots are going to slip right through to the consumer. You cannot test your way to purity. You have to build purity in from the very beginning. This is why the purity protocol was created. The purity protocol flips the entire paradigm upside down. Instead of trying to clean up a contaminated mess, the purity protocol prevents the contamination from ever happening in the first place. It starts with pure seed. It requires dedicated fields that have not grown gluten-containing grains for years. It mandates dedicated combines, dedicated trucks, and dedicated gluten-free mills. When you eliminate the source of the contamination, you eliminate the hotspots. In the purity protocol system, testing is not the primary safety mechanism. Testing is simply the final verification of a process that is already secure. And even then, the testing standards are higher. Organizations like the Gluten-Free Certification Organization, or GFCO, require testing to less than 10 parts per million, twice as strict as the FDA standard. And they require testing of every single production lot, not just occasional spot checks. When a batch of purity protocol oats is tested using the R5 ELISA method, we are not hoping that the sample missed a hotspot. We know there are no hotspots because wheat, barley, and rye were never allowed into the system. Trusting the batch means understanding the science behind the label. It means knowing that an ELISA test is a powerful tool, but it is only as reliable as the sampling method behind it. It means recognizing that when it comes to celiac disease, a batch average of 5 parts per million is meaningless if your specific bowl of oatmeal contains a 95 part per million wheat kernel. True safety does not come from a sorting machine or a statistical average. True safety comes from an uncompromising commitment to purity, from the seed in the ground to the spoon in your bowl. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Trust Your Oats. In our next episode, we will be looking at the future of farming, exploring how regenerative agriculture and cutting-edge technology are coming together to create the next generation of sustainable oats. Until then, stay healthy, stay curious, and as always, trust your oats.